Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, audience members, for joining us this morning for this really important panel discussion. I'm Kristen Arute. I'm president of Hingham CARES, which is the Substance Misuse Prevention Coalition here in Hingham. In just a second, I'm going to give every panel member an opportunity to introduce themselves and give a little bit of background to who they are, why they're here sitting on the panel. But I just want to give a little background from the perspective of Hingham CARES. So we recently had a class that was offered to parents called Guiding Good Choices. And that class sort of initiated some conversations about teen substance use and questions about, well, what if? What if my child is caught drinking at somebody else's house? What if someone's drinking at my house and I'm unaware of it? So those kinds of questions prompted this panel discussion. And I have to say, it was so easy to put together, and I can't believe we have 6 such well-informed individuals here sitting before us. So please feel free to take advantage of it. We had asked people if they had any questions ahead of time, so I do have some scenarios that I'd like to bring up to the panel. I have some questions as well, but I'm hoping that the audience will drive most of this discussion. So thank you all for being here. And why don't we start over here with District Attorney Cruz, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move on down the panel.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and it's an honor to be here to deal with a lot of the issues that we're doing, not just in Hingham, but we deal with it throughout our county. I'm Tim Cruz. I've been the DA now here in Plymouth County for 19 years, and I have been the chief law enforcement official and deal with roughly 20,000 criminal cases a year that occur here in Plymouth County every single year. We have 64 lawyers. We deal with approximately 515,000 people population-wise, over 800 square miles, so it's a very big area. And one of the things that we do that perhaps a lot of people don't know about, a lot of preventative issues that we end up dealing with for the problems that are going on. Because we would much rather be dealing with problems before they happen rather than after. And one of the biggest things that are going on now are obviously with kids and what they're doing, and how, as they grow up and mature, and they think they're more grown up and mature than they are. When kids are, I think, as they say in the past, when you're young and irresponsible, you're young and irresponsible. So how do you do a fine line of trying to help the kids as best as you can, and also at the same time hold them accountable for their actions so that they learn that you've got to make sure that we're going to hold them. And that's why it's great to be here with this panel of people today from the MIAA, from the school, the athletic director, superintendent of schools, because everything that our kids do has consequences. Their actions have consequences, much bigger than they can foresee. So it's great to be here today. We have all sorts of programs in our DA's office that we work with on the diversionary side so kids don't get criminal offender record information, and we can help them navigate themselves through a lot of the issues that are going on. And I'm appreciative of being here today so we can talk a little bit about that, and I thank Kristen for inviting me.
Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. I'm the police chief in the town of Hingham. I've been the police chief now for 4 years. I've been an officer in the town of Hingham for 39 years. And this is sort of a subject that's pretty dear to my heart. I think over the years, as we all look back to our younger years, we can always sort of remember somebody that was killed in a drunk driving accident around that high school age. And it's just such a travesty when that stuff kind of happens. And I think we as a society, and myself as a chief of police, can just try to tell you that, the reason we try to enforce these laws and make people responsible and try to toe the line and what we sort of consider a zero type policy, that we're going to act on these types of things because we're trying to prevent those tragedies that we've all lived through the years. And I can't, I was trying to put a number on it this morning as I was thinking about this, and I can probably think of my 39 years, there's probably been like 10 accidents or deaths that are related to young kids drinking and driving, and I think that's just far too many. And I really hope that by educating people and talking about this, we can make parents more aware, because kids learn from their parents, and I think that's an important message we're trying to get. We need to have the parents be responsible dealing with some of these situations and do the best they can. Well, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Paul Austin. I'm Superintendent of Schools for the long time of 6 months. So I haven't been here very long, but I'm new here. I I want to reiterate something that District Attorney Cruz had just said, that this is not unique to us. This is an issue that happens. I came from Maine, and we had as many issues there as you might have here. And I would also echo what Chief Olsson just said. I think as an administrator, you fear the things that you see on a weekend when there is an accident, when somebody takes the life of a child due to drunk driving or impaired driving. There are just big issues for us. And we do, in the school system, we try to find that balance between good policy and education. So finding that balance between how do you educate the student that this is on good choices, but at the same time to hold them accountable to the things that do make a difference in life. And I think we try to have that balance happen so that we can do our job as educators and have positive relationships with students. I also say that I'm here because we have a great relationship with the members of our town, and working with the police department and having a school resource officer involved, and so the relationship we have with them is very important to us in how we care for our students. So I'm pleased to be here today and certainly hope to be a resource as well.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Swanson. I'm principal at Hingham High School. Worked at Hingham High for 13 years now, actually 10 of them as an assistant principal, and the last 2.5 years as principal at Hingham High. Also live here in the community, care very deeply about this community, about this school, and about the issue that we're discussing here today. It certainly was a big part of my work on a day-to-day basis as an assistant principal to enforce the rules and regulations of the high school. Quite a few of which deal with this subject. And while the heart of our mission as a school is to educate students and help them read and write effectively, think critically, also crucial to the heart of that mission is to make healthy decisions, and our mission to keep students safe as well. There's nothing that's more important than that, and I look forward to discussing that subject with all of you here today.
Good morning. My name is Jim Quatromoni. I'm the Director of Athletics at Hingham High School. This is my 3rd year here at Hingham, my 14th as an athletic director. I'd like to thank Mr. Root and Hingham CARES for bringing this topic forward and having some conversation here. And it's my pleasure absolutely to be here. My primary responsibility as the Director of Athletics is the safe participation of our student athletes in interscholastic athletics. That to me carries over into outside of practices and games and competition, and this topic is particularly important to that idea.
Good morning. My name is Richard Pearson. I'm the Associate Executive Director of the MIAA. My history is in the schools, which I think is an important piece of who I am and what I do at the MIAA. I spent 23 years in the schools, 13 as a high school administrator, high school principal and assistant principal, and then a teacher before that. 7 years ago, I began my work full-time at the MIAA to help guide and manage our schools. I'm really pleased to be here with Dr. Austin, Principal Swanson, and Athletic Director Jim Quatromoni to support them and what their school does. The MIAA, as an association of member schools, is about 378 member schools. We manage about 230,000 athletes across the state of Massachusetts. But what's critically important to know about who the MIAA is and how they exist and what their rules come from is that we're a private nonprofit entity that is governed by the principals, superintendents, school committee members across the Commonwealth. So I actually had a vote on committees in the MIAA when I was a principal, and now I work on behalf of all these great school leaders, which is a critical piece of the puzzle, and the history of rules like our chemical health rule. In 1984, there was a Blue Ribbon Committee that got together to discuss how they can use interscholastic athletics to help guide and recommend decision-making and thoughts for our adolescents. And in 1985, they came out with a report that put together the chemical health policies as it sits before us today. That committee was made up of doctors, principals, superintendents across the Commonwealth to try to say we can use this moment and this opportunity in interscholastic athletics to help guide adolescents and students as they make their decisions. So that's kind of the genesis of the rules and the genesis and kind of the foundation of who the MIAA is and how we support the leaders of the schools. So really pleased to be here and answer questions from that perspective, but also my life perspective as well, having done this job for a few years myself.
Thank you all so much. 'Tis the season. I am recovering from something, so you'll have to excuse my coughing fit. So the purpose of today's discussion is to talk specifically about implications with regard to youth substance use. And that takes place both within the school, on the field, as well as on the weekends or in the evenings at home, that sort of thing, at friends' homes. So one thing that I would like to start off with is parents are interested in knowing the implications of having children drinking at their homes, what the potential effects could be or consequences could be with regard to that if it turns out that somebody causes an accident on the way home from a party at their home. So in that vein, I would love to have District Attorney Cruz expand upon both the Good Samaritan Law and the social host law.
Thanks, Kristen. The social host law has been around for quite a while regarding parents who see fit to have parties, gatherings where they provide alcohol or some other substance to kids. Now, you're basically foolish to do that if you're an adult. You're going to put yourself in civil liability potential and also criminal responsibility. So it's a two-pronged issue that you're going to be dealing with. And what we see here in Massachusetts, unfortunately, is when if some parent sometimes thinks that, well, it's okay, I have all my kids' friends at the house, I'll take all their car keys, nobody's going anywhere, nothing's going to happen here, we'll give them some beers, what could possibly happen? Well, it's illegal. That's step one. So you're contributing to the delinquency of a minor, if they're minors, which I assume they would be. You're also providing and furnishing alcohol, and all those things carry with them criminal penalties if that's brought forward to the police department's attention. And how would that happen? Well, many times, unfortunately, it would occur from the fact that an individual, because most of our kids are smarter than us, and they're not going to give you the right set of keys to their car, they're going to be driving out after, if you provide alcohol, something goes out and something terrible happens. So there's a car accident, somebody is grievously hurt, somebody is killed. You, as the provider of the alcohol, now have subjected yourself to civil liability, and basically it puts your home and everything you've worked hard for your lives in jeopardy. You are going to be sued. Now, in Massachusetts, case laws came down within the last few years, which indicates that you have to actually provide the alcohol. So some people may think that they're avoiding that if they don't bring the alcohol, but I guarantee you, I've been a lawyer now for 35 years, and if you know a lawyer, what they're going to do is they're going to sue everybody. That's going to be a fact issue, whether who provided the alcohol. So everybody will get sued to bring in insurance companies to make sure they can resolve those cases. That's what happens. Civil cases are about money. That's all it is. And the destruction that we all see on the criminal end of it, from motor vehicle homicides, from manslaughters that occur. I'll tell you, like I said, I've been doing this for either as a prosecutor or a defense attorney for 35 years. And I've met with more people than I can count who have lost loved ones or have killed somebody. And I assure you, when those cases go to court and you see some young kid in court crying their eyes out, 21-year-old kid that maybe killed a stranger, maybe killed one of their buddies in their car because they went out and they drank, and they tell that judge, I would do anything to trade places with them. I believe them, but it's too late. So we have a responsibility as parents to make sure we put our kids in a position to succeed, not just in getting into college, but let's make sure that they get through their lives and they understand that they have you, the parents. That's what we need. We need parents. I often talk of, I have a couple of kids now who are older, but everybody wants to be friends with their kids. I agree. I want to be friends with my kids too, when they're 25 years old. But when they're 14 and 15, they're my kids. They're in my house. We have a responsibility to teach them right and wrong. And I think that all too often we see individuals who are doing these things and allowing our kids that next step. The step, whether it be with internet issues, whether it be with social media issues, whether it be with alcohol or drug issues, we really need to say no, because what's going to happen is terrible criminal consequences can happen to you and to your child. Civil consequences whereby you can lose your homes, and judgments have come against people who provided alcohol, millions of dollars. And whether or not you're going to be able to salvage everything you worked hard for, I don't know. And then if there is nothing as blown up as that, there's going to be other ramifications at the school and with sports. And as all of our kids are struggling to stand out as they try to go to college and they're filling out applications, and we want to make sure they don't have criminal records, and we want to make sure that they're the captains of these teams and things such as that, and they're all working hard, their actions have consequences. And that's why we have to really be parents and make sure that we're dealing with those issues.
Thank you very much. So here's a proposed scenario. let's say parents are unaware that their kids are, well, let's say parents are aware that their kids have friends over, that there's a party taking place, but they're unaware that drinking or some sort of substance consumption is taking place. And something happens to one of those children at their home. What are the ramifications as a result of that?
Well, I think, as I said a little bit, a few statements ago, I think that that's going to be a factual question, whether you know or not. You're obviously going to say, I had no idea what the kids were doing. That's what most people are going to say, whether they knew or they didn't know. I think it's a good thing to have kids over your house. I always felt good when my kids' friends would come over the house. They're in your house. You know they're there. You know, go downstairs and check every now and then, because our kids are kids. And our kids are going to try to bring in a beer or whatever it may be, or they're going to take something out of your alcohol cabinet. So the fact that you say you didn't know, like I said, the lawyers are going to do what they're going to do. And if somebody, God forbid, goes out, and it's not just car accident. Risky behavior happens too when kids are drinking or taking drugs. Risky sexual things can occur. You don't need that aggravation and exposure that you're going to have. So I think that's a question of fact. A question of fact is that the lawyers are going to say, you know what, I'm going to bring you into this case anyways. You say you didn't know, but I don't know that. And we'll do depositions, we'll do interrogatories, we'll do request for protection of the documents, we'll do all this civil case. And we'll blow the whole thing up, and your homeowner's policy is going to be dealing with it. And if you don't have enough coverage, your house is in jeopardy. So the bottom line is, let's pay attention to our kids. Let's make sure that we know, to the extent that we can, what they're doing when their buddies are over. And obviously do not provide them with alcohol or anything else where they're going to be putting themselves in jeopardy.
Thank you. So I'd like to bring the chief into this conversation. So let's simplify it a little bit more, to simplify this scenario. Parents are aware that their kids have friends over, unaware that the kids are drinking. A neighbor calls because they're not happy about what's taking place at that home. The police arrive and discover that a couple of kids are intoxicated, or discover, empty alcohol container bottles. What happens at that point? Do the parents get roped into the conversation? Are there charges pressed?
Yeah, we sort of have a mandate that we give. Officers always have options on how to do everything. Our main goal is to make sure everybody's safe, that the matter is dealt with as fairly as possible, and that there's accountability there. So, my days when I was younger as a patrol officer on the road, would arrive at a house because we got calls from neighbors. And if we're getting calls from neighbors, I really can't believe that anybody in that house or a parent in that house has no idea that something's going on. I mean, we all as adults, I would never have a party at my house because I know my father would be going through the house every 5 minutes. You would find excuses to walk down there and check it out. And I think, as the DA mentioned, it's not just the alcohol issues. There's other behaviors that go on in your house. How many kids are making out? What are they doing? Where are they? Is it just going beyond that makeout point? Is there, we're seeing so much on the news that what kids do in high school and what gets put on social media. I don't want to I hope my kids have a chance to be on the Supreme Court, and there's nothing wrong with what's in their yearbook or their social media. Because what we're seeing now is this stuff lasts forever. And the actions kids are taking in high school and the different systems they put out there, because they love social media. I can't even keep track of it. I just took myself off of social media. It's a public record, and kids are at parties and they're showing themselves drinking alcohol. So we try to mediate the problem as best. Sometimes it's very difficult, especially when there's parents not there. The kids will tend to all run away. You can't catch them all. And we'll try to identify people. We'll try to reunite families back together. Don't put kids behind the wheel. Sometimes it may be necessary for the officers to arrest people. We had a couple incidents this year where there were some adult parties and the owners of the house were charged. So we're trying to take proactive steps, and we will try to take proactive steps to relay this information out. And I think one of the things that sort of happens too is that with our agreements with the schools, our main purpose is to keep children safe. And if there's alcohol issues going on in younger kids, that's a potential that the school needs to know about, because it may be they may need to make some adjustments in their activities at schools, what's going on in their lives that are causing some of these issues. Are they repeat offenders? So when it comes to sharing information, our policies encourage sharing that information. It's not because we want to get anybody in trouble, but we believe that by sharing information for endangered children or kids at risk allows kids to get help and allows the school to put in some systems that may be able to help and guide these kids. And I think there's many different programs out that the DAs are working with. Plymouth County Outreach Program are working to work with the schools to help that. And one of the things that we went through when we redid our school resource memorandum of agreements with the schools is that too much focus is put on just the high school and the concern that kids are going to get punished at sport. Keep in mind that our memorandum of agreement and why we share things of endangered kids is because it applies to all the schools. It doesn't just apply to the high school. A lot of focus in people's minds is just dealing with the high school, but what do you do when you have to deal with, family issues that are occurring when kids are 5 years old? Is that going to affect how they learn? I think my greatest lesson in being chief for the past 4 or 5 years is learning that education and a child's well-being really are important, and how that child is learning and what's going on in that child's life really affects their education. And us being involved in those situations is something that affects the well-being of a child. So that's a lot of the reasons. So there's many different ways to option, and I think one of the great things is the DA's office also offers, and he sort of mentioned it, if it's a first-time offender and there's criminal charges, there's a deferment program where they can go and they get educated. They actually have to attend classes, and actually the parents have to attend an 8-hour course as well. So it's about a learning curve, and that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Chief, and that's a nice segue into bringing the educational community into the conversation. So I guess a lot of parents would love to understand that chain of communication. I know MIAA has specific rules about when the results of a violation start. It starts when the communication takes place with the schools. So if we could move over to the school community, and if you could describe what that communication looks like, that chain of communication looks like, how the students are factored into that communication, how the parents are factored into that communication, and then ramifications with athletics.
I would just say it would be very rare for the chief and I to be talking about this. I think more so that it would happen between the school resource officers, et cetera, with the principal and the athletic director. But I'll let you answer that, I think, and address how that chain of command works.
Sure. So if an incident had happened outside of school, say a party over the weekend, which is the scenario, Kristen, that you had provided initially, if there had been an incident that had required police intervention over the weekend and it involved some of our students, our school resource officer would be sent a copy of the incident report, and he would then share it with the school administration. Most likely, it would go directly to our assistant principals. And under the memorandum of understanding, whenever there's an incident that involves one of our students, the information does come to the school, and it's through that avenue of our school resource officer. We're really fortunate here in Hingham to have a very strong set of school resource officers, one for the elementary level, one at the middle school, and one at the high school. Our high school SRO also teaches a course in criminal justice, advises some clubs, and plays a really pivotal role in the school as a whole. And so one of the many things that he would do is to bring an issue like that to our attention. And then our assistant principals would be the ones to deal with the enforcement of our school regulations around behavior outside of school. And fortunately, we spend most of our time dealing with what happens in school, but there are occasionally times when we do need to confront enforcement of a school policy with regard to something that happened outside of school. And so the assistant principal would read the report, would then meet with the student and apply whatever school regulations are relevant in that particular case. If it was a party that involved alcohol, and clearly every student there knew that alcohol was present, and clearly it was from the report, the implications for the student would pertain just to extracurricular activities because the incident had happened outside of school. So any school-related consequences would play out in terms of participation in athletics or in other clubs or activities that the student might be involved with. So our basic policy is that for a first-time offense, a student who either possesses alcohol or is knowingly in the presence of alcohol outside of school would face a 2-week suspension from extracurricular activities in general, and also a suspension from their next participation in school athletics of 25% of the team's games or meets or however you would define interscholastic contests, depending on the sport. That penalty goes up to 60% of the team's contests on a second violation. And that's all in keeping with MIAA policies that apply to all schools that are members of MIAA across the state. The implications of using alcohol or any other substance within school would be much more severe, would involve suspension from school as well if it was at a school event or within the school day itself. But since we're talking about incidents outside of school, those consequences would just be extracurricular.
Anything that you'd like to add, Jim?
Current principal and former assistant principal covered it pretty well there. You know, I think one thing that happens with student athletes often when there is a consequence for a scenario like this is that they recognize that maybe some of their friends that might have been in the same situation that don't participate are not facing the same level of consequence. And I think it's important to note that within a school we do use participation in activities to help student athletes or students become the best versions of themselves in terms of grades, attendance, and behavior. So there is that higher standard that's expected of them for participation.
That's great. Richard, would you mind just outlining what the actual rules are, the MIAA rules are? I know that there are different consequences for a first instance versus a second versus subsequent instances, and how that came to be.
Well, Principal Swanson outlined them very effectively. One of the things that's important to know is, and I've already talked a little bit about who the MIAA is, we're an association of member schools that are self-governed. So it's up to the schools to maintain minimum standards based upon what the entire constituents has voted on. So the minimum standards were outlined by Principal Swanson, very clear about the first violation being 25%, a second violation of 60%, as he articulated very well. There is opportunity for outside counseling after that second offense that can reduce offenses, but this is all in the hands of the school. So it was really very well outlined. I think it was articulated clear as day. It says in the rules, once the principal confirms, so a lot of our rules use the principal as the target of the language. So once the principal confirms that something happens, and then things move forward from there, which was well articulated. The rule actually has the words as he's articulated: buy, sell, use, consume, or possess. So whatever standard at that minimum level that the school offers, that's where it begins. Some schools in the Commonwealth have slightly different standards that might be higher than that. But that is up to the school community to make those decisions. And that's why the principals and the superintendents will always lead with their community and how best to adhere to that. And you know, we're very fortunate that our schools maintain that minimum standard for as much consistency, minimum standard or above, for the consistency across all schools in the Commonwealth. And as I've already told you, this began in 1985 with the opportunity that this Blue Ribbon Committee believes, and I still think principals believe, that the opportunity to use extracurricular athletics as a carrot to enable and teach decision-making for teenagers is critical. I also have, as I told you, I was a principal myself, so I have that perspective. And I would just say one thing that I always used to do, and I was trying to be very bold about this. I would stand before every one of our classes in September when we had our class meetings, and I would look them all in the eye and talk about decision-making around chemical health and drugging and drinking. And I would actually say to the kids, and I think it's a very fair statement, and I have 2 daughters myself, I think it's an incredibly selfish act for our leaders and our participants in extracurricular activities who are relied upon by others. I think it's an incredibly selfish act for a high school student to A, violate the law, but B, put their group, their team, their people that they're working with in jeopardy. And so I would always say that pretty clearly. And I think it's a very fair statement. If you're a captain of a team, there you go, you're one a leader. If you're just a participant in that team and you're needed, then you're making a decision too. So that was the thing I did as a principal. But I think all these rules and the vision of the schools center around that and helping to make teenagers make the best decision possible. That's what we do in schools. That's what we do as parents, is to try to set the foundation for decision making.
Terrific, thank you.
If I could add to something to that, just for a moment. You know, we've talked about the punishment side of things. What do we do? What's the discipline side? What's missing out of that is that we're educators, and so we recognize we're not law enforcement. That's what they do. They worry about the laws that are broken. For us, yes, there's a carrot that we use, that's for sure, to help students make good choices, but that's not where it stops for us. You know, we're working with the students to rebuild. I've talked with Athletic Director Quatromoni with this before about the fact that we have an obligation then to how do we rebuild students to take responsibility for their acts and build them, help them learn from that. And I don't want that to be missing from the conversation today. That's our respective duties over here, so that when we're working with students, we have to work with them, ongoing. And therefore, how do we help them get over this and understand, yeah, I made a mistake, I'm going to clean it up, and now we're going to do this better. So it could be meeting with adjustment counselors, or with guidance counselors, or with teachers, or with principals, or with administrators too, or coaches. And we're also not just talking about athletics. I want to be very clear about that. That's often what's brought up. We're talking about any extracurricular that we do. There are other students that have other activities that are not athletics here. And so it's not just about athletics. It's about any student making those kind of choices, and we take that very seriously on our side to help them learn from their mistakes and to move forward in making better choices. So it does exactly what Chief Olson had talked about. We don't want this coming back somewhere that when you're trying to get a job somewhere that it resurfaces. That's not what we want. We want them to learn from that and to move forward so that they can take that and then they can go on and lead productive lives and as good citizens.
And if I could just jump in also, I agree with Superintendent, but the non-traditional role now of law enforcement has really taken over. It's not like when I was a young prosecutor back in the 80s, all you got was a police report. You didn't know anything about the child or things such as that. Now, with the diversion programs that we have, which also bring the educational component because of the ramifications of what kids face when they are charged with even a minor transporting alcohol or a minor being in possession of alcohol, whatever it may be, the ramifications are really significant nowadays. And it could certainly affect that child's ability to go to school or get a good job or whatever it may be. So therefore, now in our diversion programs, if for a first offense of a child that's done that, perhaps he was arrested at a party or taken away at a party as much as kids were, we would offer them diversion, and they would not be arraigned in court. They don't get a criminal offender record information, so therefore you can honestly say, I don't have a criminal record. And as long as you comply with the learning aspect of it, in that non-traditional role, we say, here's what you do if you want this case to go away. 90% of the kids will do it. 90% of the kids of that, we never hear from again. And we've done this with thousands of kids since 1985 here in our county. And there's a question over there.
Oh, Diane, I'm sorry, you weren't here for the intro. Could you come up to the mic?
Hi, Diane DiNapoli, 16 Gardner Street. I just had a question. What, if anything, would stay on the child's academic record if they were suspended either first or second time? Thank you.
Right. We do get that question a lot for any suspension or any disciplinary activity. It's a common question from a student or a parent, is this on my record? And I guess the answer is generally sort of yes and no at the same time. Any disciplinary incident is maintained in-house as part of our own record keeping, and so an incident were to happen again, we know we've spoken with a student previously about a situation, but none of our disciplinary data at all is ever reported out to a college. So when a student applies to college, we're sending an academic transcript only that makes no mention whatsoever of any disciplinary incidents. So that usually comes as relief to people that, as part of our own interest of helping people move forward with their lives, learn from a situation and move on without this really being a handicap to them in the future. It's really never a situation that should, from the school's perspective, make a student's application to college more difficult, because nowhere on the transcript would there be mention of anything, including a suspension.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. I appreciated your comments, because this certainly is a community effort. And it doesn't start with an incident, it starts with prevention. Certainly if there is an incident, then there are consequences to that incident, but it also involves using that incident as a learning tool. So I appreciate your comments very much. One last question that I have, and then I'd like to open it up to the audience, is we had touched on the Good Samaritan Law, the social host law, but I would love to just get a better understanding of the Good Samaritan Law. Parents have asked the question, what should I instruct my child to do if they're found in a situation, if they're, a friend of theirs is struggling, if I'm at a party in the woods and there are things taking place that shouldn't be taking place, what should I instruct my child to do? Should I instruct them to run? Should I instruct them to call 911? If they do call 911, are there consequences to them calling 911? Will they get in trouble if they're associated with someone who's under the influence or someone who's, God forbid, driving? So I'm going to open that up to the panel. Obviously, law enforcement is a little more well-versed in that topic, but whoever would like to respond to that question, you're welcome to.
I'll probably start out on that. I think we as individuals, whether we're teenagers or adults, are always going to come into situations that we're going to have these moral dilemmas. We had a couple of years ago, I think there was the Hingham CARES sponsored a show where a young girl was out at a party drinking at a local town, and she wandered off drunk at night, and she ended up dying. They found her in a river, died of exposure. And I think, I was always taught, and we hear about it in the military, is, my father was a big pusher of whoever you go with, you come home with. If you're with your friends, you take care of your friends. You don't abandon them. And I think those are those moral dilemmas that we are going to face as individuals at some point in our life. And you need to make that decision. If your friend is in trouble, is it really about you getting in trouble? Or if your friend is a life or death situation, that could be a life or death situation, which is more important? You getting in trouble and fleeing, getting in trouble and leaving your friend to possibly die, or deal with the situation? And I can tell you most officers, and I would say most, I would say almost all officers, realize that these situations occur. And we always try to tell people, if you have a party going on, and this happens quite a bit, you have 4 or 5 friends over, there's nothing really big going on, and the next thing you know, through social media, everyone's knocking at your door and showing up with beer and alcohol. What do you do as a teenager at that point? We've told people that, hey, listen, if that starts to happen, we would prefer that you call 911, call an adult, call a neighbor, and say, listen, I was having this little get-together, the party got out of control, people are coming over, I want you to come down and help us. We will come down and help you in those situations. Because we have that option too, and we can understand that at that point we're trying to help people and you're trying to make a right decision. And that's important. So we need to teach kids that it's okay sometimes and these are conversations that kids need to have in advance with their parents and their neighbors. One of the other subjects we taught, we had some stuff that we did with Harbor Media, and we talked to kids about what would they do if their friend calls them and they need a ride, they're at a party and they're drunk, what would they do? And my many years as being a young patrolman, and you'd go to a party, it's amazing that 98% of the kids that are at the party just arrived to pick up their friend and they never had any of the alcohol. I find that hard to believe, but so what we've tried to tell them is that, listen, you need to make that phone, when your friend calls, you don't have to go into the party to get your friend. You tell your friend to come out, and then you take them home. And the question that I posed to the high school kids who were asking this, what happens when you pick up that person that's intoxicated? Do you take them home? What do you do now as an individual? Because you have now basically assumed responsibility for your friend. Do you just bring them down the street and drop them off and tell them, like, okay, Jimmy, walk home, I'm not going to tell your parents? Or do you bring that child to the door, knock on the door, get the parents to say, listen, your son called me, he's under the influence, I picked him up so that he'd be safe, and turn him over to the parents? You have to do that, in my mind, because if you drop the kid off at the end of the street and he walks away, you really haven't helped the situation. So these are conversations that somehow or another we need to encourage kids to have with their parents. And, you know, one of the children asked, how do I have that conversation with my parent? Because it's hard to. And I said, well, first of all, don't just start it all at once. You know, try to ease into it a little bit. Find a good time that you can get that conversation going. Because parents always aren't comfortable about talking with these things either. But I think when kids want to talk to us, they're looking for guidance and they're looking for you to be the parent, not their friend. What are you going to do? You need to have arrangements with your child and children to say, if I'm in a situation, can I call on you for help? And I always felt that, listen, I would, there's a couple times, one time I remember calling my father. It wasn't really alcohol related, but my friend we were going 100 miles an hour down the driftway. And I said to myself, I got to get out of this car because I want to live. And I had to call him from Situate for a ride home. I never heard about it until 2 days later. Then we sat down and we had a talk. So I think, you know, at certain things, we want to encourage good action on the kids, but there's still that responsibility key that goes along with it. So I think those are those conversations that you really need to find a way to communicate with your children and talk to them about having a plan in place. And I think that's something Officer Ramsey always teaches in his DARE classes. Have a plan in place. What would you do if you get in a bad situation? How do you get out of it without, you know, embarrassing yourself or feeling the peer pressure? So talk to your kids about that. It's crucial. They need to know these types of exit type routines that they can apply. And also that, you know, when they do the right things, we'll try to support their right actions.
I agree with the chief. Call the police, because you know what? All too often you deal with parents who, their children's friends did not call the police, and with the terrible things that can happen from that. And when you see them forever after that, you know, you often think, and I'm sure those kids think, what if I had done something differently? Is that what they want to live with for the rest of their life? That their friend was hurt, their friend was killed, or they hurt or killed somebody else because something terrible, something stupid? Well, no matter what the consequences are, you have to help the people in your community. You have to help these kids. And, you know, whether it's Taylor Meyer that passed away when she drowned in 2 inches of water at an airport over in Norfolk, or whether it be kids that are drinking and driving and they're driving like idiots, our kids have to have responsibility. And the Good Samaritan issues as pertains to a lot of that stuff came up with the opioid issues that are going on now. A lot of the individuals who were using opioids, and I'm not talking prescription meds, but I'm talking, as unfortunately, as people evolved into heroin and then fentanyl and carfentanil, and they're using hypodermic needles, people wouldn't call. If somebody overdosed, they'd abandon their friend sitting there. And now there are those laws that prevent them. So call 911. Save these people's lives. That's all I want to see. We'll deal with, and they'll deal with it after all, but I don't think there's anything worse that somebody can deal with than know that their failure to act cost somebody their life, and they're going to be living with that the rest of their lives. And that's something you don't want to put a burden on your child or their friends. So I think that our kids have to understand that.
Very much. All right, I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience.
Can I just add one thing?
Oh, yes.
Student athletes and high school students that are involved in activities should get out of those situations as soon as they realize that those types of things are going on. They run the risk of the police coming there and winding up in a police report and facing a suspension.
You're saying even if they aren't themselves consuming any substance?
Correct.
Okay. And then the consequences to that would be
The
everything
same 25% for
involved in
first
the
offense.
MIAA rules?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know.
But if I can just add, again, I'm going to go back to the education piece and the mission of our district, which is really helping us become global citizens, right, when they leave our schools. We also have many clubs and activities that really work with those moral dilemmas to help children understand. We have the Acts of Kindness groups. We have the civic awards that we just saw last week about people who are doing these kind of good acts. And so I wouldn't want people to think that we don't address those things. I think, you know, I survived raising 4 children too. And I say I survived because those are all very difficult times. And so kids go through all kinds of different changes in their lives and have all kinds of dilemmas that they're forced to face. We do have an obligation, and we work with our students to help them understand what would you do if you were in this situation, for them to think through, and we take every opportunity we can educationally to help them understand what their options are. So yes, there's a punitive side that if you don't get out of that situation, you're going to pay for that with 25% of your, which is a small pay. when it really comes to what it could be. And I've said that to people when they've complained that it's not fair, or but it's effective. The reality is it's effective for us. Our policies and our procedures are effective in deterring students from making bad choices. We get that. But I don't want anyone to leave here thinking that by any stretch of the imagination we don't take that further and we continue the education. And we use these kind of situations that you just talked about to have real life experiences with students and help them understand and think through what would happen to me, not just punitively, but emotionally, those decisions about what you live with for life if you don't act a certain way.
And for them, it's all purely hypothetical.
Right.
As adults, we can reflect back on our lives, and we've all had experiences, but for them, they haven't gotten there yet, so.
Absolutely.
By the way, you're still not out of the hole. As long as you have kids, you'll be parenting for the rest of your life.
8 grandchildren now, so I'm on the second round.
Oh, my goodness. Any audience members with questions? Yes, come on up.
Morning. So I heard Tim say at the beginning of this discussion that a parent says, "Oh, I didn't know that they were drinking in my house." Now, that troubles me because if I remember right, the civil standard isn't simply that you know, it's that you should have known. And so once you've gotten to that, and the standard is also not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but preponderance of the evidence, or more likely true than not true. So you've talked a lot about the ramifications to the children. I'm interested in hearing what are the ramifications to a parent who allows this to happen, who encourages this to happen. Is there any program to make the parent a better parent? Because after all, our children are reflections of what we teach as a parent.
I think that when we deal with parents in the criminal court system, I don't have any classes for or adult diversion programs for individuals who choose to give alcohol to their kids. You would hope that they were mature enough to understand that is a mistake and that is a criminal violation. So therefore now you're going to be in a position where you're going to be charged with one of the numerous criminal allegations that can be placed against you. You're going to go to court, you're going to go through the system, and then a judge at some point is going to make the determination if you're guilty or not guilty and what the penalty provision will be. I would hope that they would understand that, and all you have to do is, watch TV, open the newspaper, go on social media, and you see terrible things are happening, and that you are smart enough to understand that, by doing this, you are opening up potentially the door civilly to a lesser standard of proof, to the preponderance of the evidence. I always say it's like 51% you're going to show, and compared to the criminal cases, which it's kind of like ivory soap. It's 99 and 44 100s. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And in trying to prove these cases, and like I also said, if God forbid you do something, in my opinion, stupid like that, then what you're going to do is you're going to open up, if somebody gets hurt or injured, you are going to get sued. And isn't that enough to make you wake up that you have worked hard your whole life and you have a beautiful home and you have all these assets and things such as that? People are going to go after them. The people that have been hurt because of your actions, or your inaction. And when you say, I didn't know anything about it, I think many times, like I said, it's going to be a fact-finding mission by the lawyers. They're going to have investigators. They're going to have depositions. They're going to have all sorts of stuff, and you're going to get sued. And eventually, the truth comes to the top. And criminally, you'll be charged, and civilly, you'll be at exposure. So once again, to our adults that may be watching and or listening, is that please don't provide that stuff. Don't put us in the position of doing that to you, and don't put your kids in the position of that also. Of the position of doing something and maybe going out and hurting somebody. It happens in an instant. And like I said earlier, I've been doing this stuff a long time, and I've talked to lots of people on both sides of the fence. And we need to make sure, I don't want to have people have those conversations anymore. If you've never had those conversations, I know a lot of people have, and they know people that have lost loved ones. They are devastating, and they are devastating forever. So they will be penalized here in Plymouth County. They will face criminal conduct charges, and they will also potentially be facing civil exposure.
And I'd like to add to that, I think we, as society, need to look at what we're doing and how we do it. And I know working with the Plymouth County Outreach Group, which deals with the opioid issues, and Hingham CARES and other similar groups, we realize that the opportunity to make changes exists in the youth. I still have a hard time believing that we have to worry about adults bringing alcohol to a high school football game and solo cups, or a Little League event, or a hockey event. You know, we as adults, this is not, and I don't really understand either, to be quite honestly, why you want to pay $60,000 to send your child to a college and to actually think that their right at that college is to drink all they want and pretend it's a frat party, or pretend that it's you know, Animal House or something like that. We need to look at society, how we're dealing with alcohol. We've dealt with so many issues. 30 years ago, there was this giant campaign to prevent drunk driving, and it was a successful campaign. 20 years ago, it started domestic violence. There was a campaign, and we've been very successful in that. 10 years ago, it started with the opioid drugs. We're now working on mental health issues. It's through education and change, but we as a society, and we need to look at ourselves and say to us, everything we do revolves around alcohol. And I'm not beyond going to a restaurant and have a drink, believe me, I realize that, but we need to think as adults is that message we show. We raise our children, and everything we do involves alcohol. And somehow or another, I know in the youth survey that it's getting higher and higher. I was sort of amazed at the numbers that Hingham is above the curve of other towns. And, you know, we had recently had Hingham in the Square, the Christmas in the Square, and I had to go down and meet with the merchants and tell them they shouldn't be serving alcohol in their stores. It's not the time. It's not the place. You know, why do you need to do that? There's a bunch of kids down there. First of all, you're not allowed to serve alcohol unless you have a license. But this is how it sort of drifts in there, and this is what kids see. So sometime as adults, we need to look at that. And I think the message for the police department is that we're going to be consistent. I know when you raise kids and you try to get them, you need to have consistency, and you need to know what's right and what's wrong, and given all the facts, and then you make your decision, and there are consequences to it. I think somewhere along the way we're sort of forgetting all that stuff.
You just touched on something very important. There are two very critical aspects to prevention. One is modeling. Community modeling, parental modeling, and the other is accessibility. So you're absolutely right. Anybody else from the audience? Diane? Oh, yes.
Sorry, I don't want to cut him off, Diane. I'm sorry, Diane. I just want to add to that because I think, you know, for me, this isn't just about kids. This is such an important conversation. It's about our culture. It really is, and you just hit upon that. And I really have to believe that if we have a culture that says this isn't acceptable, we have to do a better job of working with our booster groups and with our supports, our PTOs, to make sure that everybody gets the message. This is unacceptable in Hingham. It's unacceptable everywhere. But we can lead that. We can be leaders in this fight against things that happen in the schools because they're somehow acceptable. You can talk about punishment to adults. I think the punishment that's more powerful is when your community says this is unacceptable to us. And I think if that happens, and I believe that the vast majority of people that live in Hingham, I'm sure, believe that this is unacceptable. We just have to have this conversation. This is an uncomfortable conversation when we talk about things that really do happen out there. It's just uncomfortable. You would think they don't. But as a parent, as a grandparent, I want to be sure if my child is going to go to Chief Olson's child's, house for some some party or something, I have to believe and I have to trust that Chief Olson has my child's back, and that there isn't going to be anything happening there that I would not be proud of happening. And I think that's where we have to do more work. We have to have this conversation outside, and we have to utilize our groups that very strongly believe of raising really responsible children in a healthy way, because this is not just about all of us up here. It really is about a community, and it takes all of us to make that change.
Yes, absolutely. Diane, come back up.
Sorry, Diane.
It's kind of a follow-up on that. It's Diane again. So speaking of society, Massachusetts has legalized recreational marijuana, and I wanted to know if there was any new case law or anything you can help parents or homeowners with understanding. It's not as easy to know if someone's coming to your house and they're taking an edible or may take an edible. Alcohol, there's certain signs, smells, we're a little better versed with that. I know the police have a hard time understanding if someone's pulled over. So how do we try, not only as parents, that's one thing, but if you have a party and someone comes, what's the liability if someone is taking an edible, hasn't drunk or take anything at your house, goes out and does something? And then if you could maybe speak a little just about any laws or any pertinent information regarding recreational marijuana for children and for adults who you may interface with. Thanks.
I think, you know, I think providing alcohol or providing marijuana or edibles, to me, is the same thing. So if you are distributing that, if you are handing that out to kids, or if you are handing it out to people at your homes, I think you have a problem on your hands if they drive away and they hurt or they kill somebody or something untoward happens at your home. I think that, you know, that there should be no difference, and I know that Chief Olsson can certainly tell you the problems that the police are having and that we're having in trying to prove cases of individuals who are operating motor vehicles under the influence of marijuana, because like all the police chiefs and like the DAs all said collectively throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was not ready for the legalization of marijuana. And unfortunately, we lost that battle. So now we have to deal with it. And what we're seeing, what I'm seeing anyways now, is the chief had talked about, you know, our task force here in Plymouth County Outreach, and all the opioid issues right now. What we're also seeing is kids, because you have to be 21 to legally purchase and or use marijuana, kids now smoke, who all think, and I think the studies show this, that the kids all think marijuana is organic and healthy for you, especially compared to cigarettes and nicotine, and also, you know, and other things that are out there. They think it's actually good for you. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is we're seeing kids going to parties who are 18 years old, and people have passed around a joint and there's fentanyl in it, and they have no idea what's in it. And all of a sudden, you have just crossed the line from smoking a marijuana cigarette because of the fact that you don't know what's in it. And the only marijuana, I can't believe I'm saying this, the only marijuana you can rely on as to what it is what you actually purchase at these shops. Because at least you know what you're getting there, whether it be an edible, whether it be candy, or whatever it's going to be. So now we find ourselves crossing those lines and trying to prove cases beyond a reasonable doubt when you have no odor of alcohol. Maybe their eyes are glassy, maybe they're not. And in Massachusetts, in light of the fact that we cannot use refusals of breath tests, refusals of field sobriety tests, we cannot go get blood extrapolations from individuals so we can find out what's actually in their blood. That's what the breathalyzer all is. It's really just trying to figure out, it's a simulated amount of what your blood alcohol content is. We can't use any of that stuff here in Massachusetts. So without that, how do you prove those cases beyond a reasonable doubt? Incredibly challenging. Because, and also, if the guy had 10 OUIs, when they go to trial, all the jury and or the judge is going to hear about is that one case. For sentencing purposes, after they're convicted, then you hear about the other ones. And so if you hear a guy, it's his 10th OUI, you're going to say, oh my gosh, he's done it 9 other times, he's a danger, he's going to kill somebody, and you're probably going to find him guilty. In Massachusetts, in light of the fact that we are not allowed to put in evidence of sobriety sometimes because of the fact we can't talk about that, or the refusals of these different machines that would indicate somebody's under the influence of whatever the alcohol or substance is, it makes it real challenging. And in Massachusetts, we don't have a comparable breathalyzer or a blood test for the, we have a blood test, but we don't really have a quantification number that we can use yet in Massachusetts. So like I said, we weren't ready for the legalization of marijuana. It is a disaster, and pretty much with everything the police said and everything the DA said.
I think just to follow up on that, and probably with the schools, but it's a little bit off the subject, but like we see with the vaping, another thing we weren't ready for, obviously, as a society, and you know, the fact that we actually had to, people were actually dying related to vaping. That, you know, I never heard any presentations that it could be dangerous to you. And I think one of the problems that I've heard from the school aspects is that kids actually think it's okay to vape because it's not smoking a cigarette and it's not going to harm your health. So if they're vaping tobacco products, you know, and maybe it's the athlete that, you know, didn't want to smoke because he wanted to be able to run faster, and but they think that because they're vaping, they're not going to have that same effect. So, you know, it's just, again, we need to continue looking at our legislators and talking to your kids to make sure they're doing everything that's the best they can to protect themselves, because sometimes these things sneak through and there's unknown consequences, which we found out with the vaping. So I give the governor credit for putting that rule into effect to put a stop on it and revisit the situation.
Anybody else? Yes, come on up.
My question is to Mr. Pearson. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the when someone has had a second offence and you offer that they can get help. I think that we see that a lot with even the law enforcement for people who are involved with opioids, trying to get people help and trying to work on diversion. So what does it look like, and how much does it reduce the suspension from games for students?
Sure, I
Thank
can
you.
elaborate. I know Principal Swanson could as well, too. Having been an assistant principal, we probably dealt with it a lot. But the rule, it's pretty straightforward, as outlined in the minimum standard in the handbook, that the second violation is 60%. But should a person enroll in a program, then it can be reduced to 40%. The approval of that program and the monitoring of the program is placed in the hands of the schools. So that they can guide it, and which makes all the sense in the world, by the way, too. That they're the ones that are going to be guiding it. They're the ones that'll be monitoring it and paying attention to it. So it's an opportunity that's written as a minimum standard from the MIAA perspective. Schools engage with that as well, too, and they're the ones that kind of select that and monitor and help the students through that discussion process. So the programs take on many different faces and looks, too, across the Commonwealth. So without giving the guidance to the school, it would be incredibly difficult to manage, specifying these three as opposed to the magnitude of what could be there. It could very well be local that the state doesn't know about. So the school would monitor that and do that with the student on the second offense and further offenses.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. And my 10 years as assistant principal, I haven't done the math to give you an exact number, but I'd probably estimate 10 or so a year cases of us having to implement the chemical health rule at Hingham High School. So say in 10 years, maybe 100 students or so who I dealt with in a situation like that. And I can only recall one case where we got to a second violation, which gives me some confidence in the effectiveness of this policy as a deterrent, that while we had a fairly significant number of first offenses, I can only recall one student athlete who got to a second offense, and that is a student who did participate in a program that he reported back was actually a very good program and had helped his, change his thinking and his habits around issues of drinking and of other substances as well. So I think it's a great thing that we have the opportunity on a second violation to reduce the penalty to 40%. It's a really good incentive for students to participate in a program. And there are a variety of them out there. The one that I remember him using, I think made a real difference.
I would suggest to a parent as well, my experience throughout life and through law enforcement is that the vast majority of people never get in contact with us. Maybe, maybe a speeding ticket somewhere, or not even that. My greatest thing is when a parent says, "Oh, do you know my child?" And I say no. That's a good thing, right? But if you have a child that's run into a second offense, or an adult that's run into a second offense, you've got a problem. Someone's got a problem, and that help doesn't, it's time to start looking at it at home as well, not just through the schools, but someone needs to start. There's an issue there that it's probably, and the child has probably got some sort of an alcohol issue, and maybe should be getting treatment through other sources besides just the school. But that's just my observation, but I think, like I said, most of us never hit that second point or the first point, so.
But I think that's one of the one of the most important aspects of having a school resource officer is that intervention piece. It's not about punishment. It's not about catching students doing something bad and punishing for that, but it's about prevention. It's about working collaboratively with the police as another opportunity in our town to work with other agencies to do prevention and intervention when it's possible. And there's far more of that goes on than we talk about with punishment. And I just want to make sure that we all understand that record on that that's what we do. Probably 99% of the time, it's about intervention and prevention, and we work with our agencies very well and partner with that. That makes a huge difference. And I'm not just confident that these policies and practices make a difference. Your data clearly tells us that, Rick, that this is something that does work. When we have a student that offends the chemical health policy, whatever athletic or play they're in or whatever it is they are, it makes a difference. We're able to intervene with that, and it's effective. And so what we're really talking about now is how do we stop the very first incident from occurring, right? And I think that's continues to be our job, and why we work, and why it's so important that we have to work collaboratively to help this and make it happen.
Right. And to that point, Hingham is very fortunate to have quite a few prevention opportunities. We have the DARE program in the middle school. There's a health curriculum that expands through all K through 12. Specifically intensively in the 10th grade at the high school. SAD, very active at Hingham High School. Last year in particular, this year has been tremendous as well. And not all towns have a SAD program. Most towns have a DARE program. Not all towns have a SAD program, and not all towns have a prevention coalition either. So we are definitely combating this from in a multifaceted approach from all different angles. So, anybody
I
else?
just had a situation that I think anytime a good thing for a parent is during some of these meetings that I've attended, if you ever get the opportunity to go to a meeting and actually speak to somebody that's gone through drug recovery and listen to the stories of their lives, it's sort of amazing, because it really makes you think about how we as society, looked at them and treated them. And it's nice to see that we realize that we could be a lot better at helping people and directing. And I think one of these meetings, and the reason I bring this up is because Dot Gallo was there, and she mentioned a program where they teach yoga to the students, and the gentleman that had been speaking said to me, "Boy, I wish I had that in high school. It really would have helped me." Because I sort of, my opinion was, why are we teaching kids yoga? What good would that do? And so I sort of followed up with Dot Gallo, and what I didn't realize is that the education level for drugs and alcohol and different situations starts at the kindergarten level. And when she spelled it out, I saw it go from kindergarten to graduation. We don't always see it as that, and I was amazed to see that all these different programs in the schools fit together. So the children are exposed to it at their levels as they grow through it. I think that was really amazing, and I don't think a lot of parents are fully aware that these programs that we talk about integrate into each other and build upon each other. So,
in an age-appropriate way,
yes,
too.
exactly, yeah.
Well, and I would expand upon that. I mean, if you look at our Hingham's tiered system of support with our social emotional toolbox that we give children now in kindergarten, and what we're teaching in elementary is about coping skills. It's about using other things to manage your emotions, and that's very effective. And I think you're absolutely right, it starts in kindergarten. But I would also say, one of the things we haven't talked a whole lot about, even though it's really the subject, is our students. We have an enormously talented group of young people here that I can't be more proud of, that they are so socially aware. And they are taking to the airwaves themselves, and they're making change. We have the vast majority of our students who really do that here, and I'm very proud of them. And I think that what we're doing as a town is working very well. Have we mastered it all? No, but I do believe we're on the right track, and that the students are the ones that really can take the lead, and that's their culture. It's what they're going to grow into society. Very proud of their efforts, and I have absolute top hope for them that they'll figure a way to make sure that Hingham stays a place where everybody can be incredibly proud to raise their children in safe places, that people care about them, and that we are all an example of that today, of how we work together to support all of these students moving forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's okay, come on up, and then we can do closing remarks.
Okay, so 3 questions, because I keep thinking of them. The first one, we touched on social media just really briefly. So obviously if your student's at a party and the police show up, and even if they weren't drinking, they're still responsible for being there and not getting out of the situation. But what if there's the police don't show up, it doesn't get broken up, but then there's a picture on social media that gets shared with the school, maybe because there's deliberately shared with the school, right? How do you kind of navigate that? Again, it's outside of school. maybe the person showed up for a few minutes, decided the party was bad, and did get themselves out, but you have no, I mean, of course, that's what they're going to tell you, but you don't, I don't know. I just think it would be clear to, like, tell my kids, like, nope, even any part of that, and you're going to get roped into getting in trouble. And then my other question is, so I understand the social host laws, and I'm responsible for anything that happens on my property. And I thought it was interesting with, like, the hotel rooms, like when you're away at a game or a race or something, and one of those rooms is in your name, you're also responsible for that too, which I thought was a good point. But what happens when we took this great program that Hingham CARES runs, and so we've now, like, come up with our family plan, and my kids all have plans for if they end up in a bad situation or they see someone they know in a bad situation and they want a parent to intervene responsibly. What is my responsibility in terms of, obviously I'm worried about the kids' safety and stuff, but in terms of, like, reporting it to the police or reporting it to a parent, or is there rules about that, or is it all just moral, what feels okay? And, like, if they call me to come pick them up at a party because it's bad, and I pick them up, but then I see there's kids in cars, and obviously growing up, my favorite babysitter when I was in second grade was drunk driving and killed her best friend, and it was like this, I mean, it rocked the whole community. And so I can see how, like, good people could
I
end
can't
up
answer
in,
some of your questions.
but I'm
I
like,
hate to say that.
what, so is there, like, a rule, like, if I see it, that I have to report it, or like, it's only my property that I'm responsible for?
I mean, no, I mean, morally is a bigger
Well,
issue
morally,
than
for
legal.
sure.
I mean,
But legally.
there's no, I mean, there's no law, you're not an accessory after the fact because you saw something happen. You saw a parent hit their kid or something. You did nothing about it. Now, should you step up and do something? Yeah, but there's no, you're not going to be legally responsible for that.
Okay.
But with the social host stuff, it's like I said, there's always going to be, I mean, it's the facts and the law equal the verdict. So what are the facts? What actually happened? What do you put into that? And if you are in a situation where you potentially have rented a room, or even if you didn't rent the room, but you were there, you were an adult that were there, maybe you left the room, and maybe then the kids drank or something, and then something terrible happened.
Right.
I just guarantee you that you're going to be brought into it.
Right.
If somebody can say that you were there, I saw her there, and she did nothing, or I just
Did
physically,
nothing.
I took a picture. And there you are, standing there. So they're gonna interview all the people that are there, and then maybe they'll figure out that you did nothing, you had nothing to do with it, you didn't know anything about it, but maybe they won't. And what they'll do then is they will sue everybody. They'll get your insurance company involved, and your homeowner's policy is much more expansive than you probably know. And they will try to get money out of your insurance policy. That's really what it comes down to. And when you're dealing with civil responsibility, that's the way that world works. And when you only have to show 51% or preponderance of the evidence, a
Right.
lesser standard of proof than in a criminal case, you could very well get sued and be found responsible.
yeah, it
And
makes
we can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case. It just, there's a difference between proofs of what we have to go forward with, so.
Okay.
I mean, I would just say that, I mean, there's many different ways. I mean, if you're friendly with the people that were there, maybe they might want to know that something's going on over their house because they may not be aware of it.
Right, and there's
could make
always
that
different
phone
types of
call, or you
parents who
could-
like to hear different sorts of are
Yeah.
ready to receive
Yeah.
certain types of information, so that's a whole, but that's a moral question. I just didn't know if there was any legal responsibility
No,
for me to
no.
report it as a citizen, that if I see something, it's only what's happening in my house that I'm
Yeah.
fully responsible for.
We do have an anonymous tip line.
Okay. Well, because you're torn both sides,
No,
right? Because you would
yeah.
hate for something horrible to happen, but then you'd hate for somebody to, like, get in trouble and
Yeah.
lose their scholarship. I think it's morally a tear, and that's why I'm like, is there
Yeah.
a legal side? But no.
I think that's a dilemma that people in law enforcement and school deal with every day. You know, I mean, you are
Which is, my hat's off to them, because I would not
you are
wanna do
right
that.
there. You've got to make the
Yeah.
call. And what's the call? And half the people are going to like it, and half the people aren't. So you can't be afraid to make that decision. You have to do what I think is right for yourself. And to me, if it was going to fall on the side of somebody potentially not getting hurt, or maybe getting hurt, I would hope that everybody would fall on the side of not getting hurt and let the chips fall where they may.
Right.
I think the other part of your question was what happens when we get some other report of something that might have happened that might not have come through the police.
Right.
But it
Well, that's
surfaces
clear.
on Facebook, and
Right.
for us, you know, it's like any case, we investigate, we try to figure out what does this mean. If there's something criminal, we turn it over to the police, but then our own students, we would investigate like we would everything. We're not we do that with any case. Whatever's even reported to us, we're still going to investigate. We're still going to get the student's perspective.
You're meeting with them, yeah.
And talk to the student about what's going on and what their intent was, et cetera. And so we would do that with all cases.
I think the best place to find out what happened over the weekend is probably the high school anyways. Right?
Yeah.
Because
It
the
might
kids
be.
talk about it.
Yeah, it's
Thank
not quiet
you.
usually.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any final questions from the audience? Those were all really great questions. This has been a wonderful discussion. I want to thank you all again for being here and participating in it. I'd like to give you the opportunity, you don't have to, but if you have any closing remarks, this is your chance before we wrap up.
I would just say I appreciate everybody coming out today, and I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. I think these forums are important. We do have a lot of these, the Hingham CARES, a lot of different facts communities throughout Plymouth County. We have Plymouth County Drug Abuse Task Force. We have Plymouth County Outreach. We have Plymouth County Hope. And it's way too long to get into all that stuff, but you should understand that there's a lot of really good people working hard at the schools and in law enforcement to try to prevent issues that are going on, trying to deal with stigma, and that's a big issue with a lot of the drug usage that's going on right now, and trying to provide services to people who are dealing with the biggest opioid crisis right now that we're dealing here in Plymouth County and the southeastern Massachusetts. You should know that in the last year, our numbers went down 1% Commonwealth, Massachusetts, 1% fatal opioid overdoses. Plymouth County went down 28%. There's a reason why that's happened, and that's because a lot of good people are working hard, and we're going to work again to try to make those numbers go down more. So thank you for everything that you all do.
I'd just like to say thank you because my biggest observation in 39 years of law enforcement is that our roles are drastically changing as police officers. It's changing into roles that we're getting involved more than we ever have before, working in collaboration with so many agencies. And I'm very proud to say that I think Hingham really, as a town, has established a working network among all departments and agencies where we rely on each other, and the work that we do with all these departments and school departments is really an asset to the quality of the town and the individuals.
Well, I would echo the thanks for people to come out, and thank you for putting this on today. You know, I've been an educator for, I guess, 3 decades. And this is the first time I've ever had a panel like this. We've talked about a hard conversation. That's just it's a reflection of a community who cares deeply and is very engaged in doing one of the best things that we can for our students, for our children, for our citizens. And I'm very proud to be part of that. This was an important conversation. I hope we keep it going. I hope that it doesn't die here and that we continue to talk through these things and to tackle the hard issues that really are facing all of us today in our society. So thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise, appreciate the opportunity to be part of it, and our school relies so heavily on community partnerships, and we're really fortunate to have a partnership with your organization. Kristen, Hingham CARES does great work, and our partnership with groups like yours and with our parents make us a better place, so thank you for that.
Thanks, Rick.
Yes, thank you for being part of this discussion. I would just like to make one final point that I think echoes Dr. Austin's conversation about the education piece. I talk to our coaches quite a bit about developing meaningful relationships with student athletes. And I'm very pleased to report to you, as I was thinking about his comments, some of my most meaningful relationships are with student athletes and students that are coming back from consequence. It's good work. And it's very rewarding, and I enjoy doing it. So thank you.
Well, thanks for allowing me to help support you as well, too. And I commend Hingham CARES for stepping up. I agree that these don't happen often as well. 30 years in education myself, and these are few and far between. But I do want to thank Rick and Jim for their leadership and touch on what Superintendent Austin said. It's far more than just the penalty, as we all know. Anecdotally, I can tell you what the Hingham kids are about. I supervise many sports across the Commonwealth, whether it's a football tournament or hockey, or I have them all that I deal with. And I can tell you that the students from Hingham do represent themselves very well. And that is because of the foundation that the school system is giving them each and every day. It's quite obvious to me. And I think that does transmit into other actions throughout the day. So whether it's the loss of kids after a tough lacrosse loss and how they act and how they stand tall, or whether it's just winning and losing and commending their opponents on the field, I can anecdotally tell you from my perspective that my experience with the Hingham athletes in this school system has been top shelf and very profound. And so I commend their leadership as well for what they're doing with kids. It will make a difference. Good conversation. This is very clear and necessary, but that's also a piece of the puzzle that goes into solving the problems. So thank you, and well done.
Great, thank you again. So, as I mentioned earlier, this evolved as a result of conversations that took place at Guiding Good Choices. We love hearing from the community. Our email address is hinghamcaresboard@gmail.com. If you're looking for prevention information, if you're looking for educational materials, if you're looking to ask a question and you kind of want to know where that question should be asked or would like the question asked on your behalf, we're happy to do that. So it's important for this conversation to continue, as you all mentioned, and it's important for us to stay collaborative. So thank you all very much for being here.